Hi, my name is Justin, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make jerky and sausage at home. These are things you can easily do in your home I'm sure you have something available to be able to help you make jerky or sausage. Today, as far as the jerky side, I'm going to be making biltong, which is a South African style jerky. It is cut from a more lean muscle, and normally it's hung to dry. I'm just going to dehydrate in the dehydrator. One of the biggest elements of biltong is coriander, and so we have a whole lot of that. We have 4 tablespoons of coriander, 2 tablespoons of salt, 2 tablespoons of black pepper, and 2 tablespoons of light brown sugar. We also have 2 pounds of, right now I've got a London broil soaking in a white vinegar, 3/4 of a cup white vinegar, 1/4 of a cup Worcestershire sauce. And this London broil, as you'll see, has been cut into strips 1 inch by 2 inches. And we are just going to take it out of this, pat it dry, and put it in the spices, and then this is going to sit overnight. And also in the fridge right now, I have sitting overnight for our sausages is the meat getting ready to grind for the sausages. We want to mix this very well. Make sure we get salt on all parts of the meat and get these clumps of brown sugar broken up. Okay, now we are going to take these out of the vinegar solution and pat them dry slightly. Doesn't have to be super dry, we just don't want them soaking wet. Now these have been sitting in here for about 3 hours, and they should have absorbed a lot of this solution onto the inside. It smells like Worcestershire sauce. And we're actually going to reserve this liquid that they were sitting in. And this piece of meat, we're gonna go ahead and make sure it gets nicely covered. Now you can do this with just about any cut of meat. Different cures are good for different cuts of meat. Biltong is especially good for any kind of game meat. It stands up extremely well to game meat, elk, venison, and you just want it to be nice and lean. This isn't a cut for a fatty piece of meat. Some other jerkies, I love doing jerky with brisket. And any other super flavorful cuts of meat. And not everyone is a big fan of it, but I love really fatty jerky. But biltong needs to be lean. This back in. And then we're going to cover that and refrigerate that as well as the rinsing liquid. Okay, so one of the most important parts of biltong is coriander. Can't emphasize enough, coriander, coriander, coriander. What makes biltong great. So I've got a 1/4 cup of whole coriander that I just roasted in a cast iron pan just until it became fragrant. Now with this coriander, all we really want to do is crack the hulls. So it breaks into 2 or 3 pieces, and those are going to go, that's going to go on the outside of the biltong after we rinse off the spices and get a little bit of vinegar on it. So I'm going to use a mortar and pestle. Work in batches, because if you do too many, you're gonna end up crushing everything when you get to everything. You're gonna end up with a lot of fine stuff, and we don't want too much fines. If you don't have a mortar and pestle, you can use a heavy pan. You can put these in a bag and bang it with a pan. Honestly. Now we're gonna do our best to rinse all the spices off of this, off the surface, so that there's plenty of surface area for that stuff to adhere to. And we do want to pat it dry in between, just like we did last time. Because we really we don't want to stick too much stuff to it, but we just want to adhere a good amount to the hulls, and we're just going to press those in. I've set up the dehydrator for the biltong. Normally you'd hang biltong, but since we're using a dehydrator, we're going to do, normally you'd hang it for about 3 days. We're going to do a little bit different with the dehydrator. It's going to dehydrate a little bit faster. It's going to be about half a day. And I've set up 3 racks for my 3 pieces so that I don't lock any airflow. And I really just don't want to dry too much at one time. We're going to set time 12 hours. I'm going to set the temp to 130 degrees. Okay, now for the payoff. We always want to make sure we cut the opposite way that we cut the first part of this. So in this case, this is going to be across the grain, because the first one was with the grain. And that is biltong. Now it's normal for it to be a little pink in the middle, because we did only put this in at 130. It's still a little moist in the inside, so I'm probably going to let this go for a day or so without even being dehydrated any further, and come back to it. But this is perfectly edible, and let's take a taste. Now the flavor is really good, it just needs to be a little bit drier. I've set my mise en place for the chorizo. We are using fresh dried peppers from a Mexican supermarket. These are guajillo peppers. We're making 10 pounds of chorizo, so I've doubled the recipe that is in the charcuterie for their Mexican style chorizo. I didn't say that right, but that's okay. So we have 12 guajillo peppers, 12 ancho peppers, and just when you're looking for these are the names of the dried peppers. They have different names when they're fresh. Ancho is a poblano pepper when it's fresh. We have a normal chipotle. The recipe actually doesn't call for these, but I like to add them in because I like the extra smokiness that comes with it. We have a morita chipotle, and we have arbol peppers. So I have 4 chipotles, 4 moritas, and 6 arbols. These are the spices that we're gonna toast. We have 4 teaspoons of peppercorns. We've got 4 tablespoons of cumin. We've got 3 inches of cinnamon, and this is the good whole cinnamon from the Mexican supermarket. It's quite a bit different than the cinnamon sticks you'll get at the store. You really want to get this. It's lighter, it's thinner, it's easy to crush and grind without totally messing up your grinder. 8 whole cloves and 12 allspice berries. We are gonna toast these whole, and then we're gonna grind them. I've just repurposed a coffee grinder as a spice grinder, so that's what we'll grind all this in. This is stuff that's not gonna be ground, it's gonna be added directly. The recipe actually calls for fresh oregano and fresh thyme, but I only had a little bit of fresh thyme, so I added dried thyme as well, and I just used dry Mexican oregano. Just buying all your stuff at a Mexican supermarket, 1, is gonna be a lot cheaper than buying it at the normal supermarket, and 2, the flavors are slightly different. Normally the Mexican supermarket things have a stronger flavor to them. So I've got right now, I just halved the amount of fresh to give us dry. So I put in 2 tablespoons of dry oregano, 1 tablespoon of dry thyme, and 2 tablespoons of fresh thyme. Then I also have in here achiote powder. It's got a really interesting flavor. You wouldn't normally use it in day-to-day cooking. I always have it on hand because it's great. It gives a beautiful red color as well. This is one of the primary drivers of the color of the chorizo. And then the recipe calls for whole cloves of garlic. I didn't have that, so I actually am using minced garlic, and instead of, it calls to roast it in the cast iron pan, but I'm actually going to just microwave it to get it to the right consistency, because we want to slightly break down the garlic. And then when we get to it, I'm going to be adding 1 cup of apple cider vinegar. So there are too many chilies to do this in 1 batch, so we are actually going to do it in 2 batches. The goal when we're heating these up is just to soften them so that it's easy to pull. It starts the process of releasing the flavors, and it's very easy to open them up and remove the seeds and stems. Make sure you stir it regularly because you don't want the chilies to burn. And we're gonna have it on medium-low heat. You want to get them hot enough to where they're basically just pretty uncomfortable to touch.
you're going to want to set them aside and let them cool down until they're comfortable to handle. Okay, now we're going to toast the rest of the spices. Turn your skillet down to low, your frying pan down to low heat, because you don't want these to cook too fast. And I want to toast these until they're just aromatic. Be really careful again with these to not let them burn. There's still going to be a lot of heat, latent heat left in the pan. In fact, you could probably just turn it completely off. And this is really just going to release all the flavors of those. Okay, now we're going to dump these out of the pan onto the plate and let those cool until they're comfortable to handle. We don't want to run the grinder with hot spices because that'll burn up the motor on the grinder. Okay, now we're going to separate the outside of the peppers from the seeds, stems, the insides. If you have disposable gloves of some kind, you will probably want to use them. You can do it with your fingers, but your hands will start burning. While there are some mild peppers in there, they're also hot peppers, and it will burn, and your hands will become covered in capsaicin. So you definitely want to be careful not to touch anything that you value not feeling like fire. So we're gonna get out as much seeds as we can and put them in a bowl. The smallest bowl that you feel pretty comfortable you can get everything in. We're gonna actually cover this with some warm water afterwards to soften these up in preparation for blending them. So you don't have to get all the seeds. It's not something that have to be perfect. If you do have gloves on, a pair of kitchen shears can be helpful for breaking into these. If you don't have gloves, it's pretty easy to do by hand. And normally I just start from the stem side, and most of the seeds are up there, and it gives you a pretty good access in. Okay, now we are going to add the warm water. We're going to let it sit for 30 minutes while we do other stuff. You just want enough water to cover the chilies. Don't want too much. And then when we are done with this, we're actually going to pull the chilies out into the blender, and then we are going to we're going to end up reusing this water that's in the chilies to wetten up the resultant mix. After adding all the water to the chilies, I did put a plate on top for it to push it down, and we're going to want to let that sit for 30 minutes. So while we wait for that to sit, we're going to go ahead and get our spices ground. I've separated out the cinnamon. If you blend that with all of this, it ends up just making a big giant mess. We don't want that too fine. It'll just make it impossible to use it. This is just a blade coffee grinder. I don't particularly recommend this one. This isn't a very good one for this purpose. I haven't found a new good one since my old one burnt out. We're gonna wanna do this in batches, and because if we do it all at once, it's just gonna clog it up. Okay, now this time everything is ready for blending together, so we've got to wait for that to go. If you are grinding your meat, while we're waiting for this, the recipe says to refrigerate, but I actually like to freeze my grinder parts before I grind. You're gonna come out with a much better consistency if those grinder parts are cold. If they're frozen, they'll take a lot longer to heat up. If you're using pre-ground meat, which is perfectly okay, there's two things to consider. One, you wanna make sure you add your sea salt ahead of time. You want that to really soak into the meat before you mix all the other spices. And then two, you're gonna have to do an extra good job of mixing in all these flavors. But pre-ground meat is perfectly okay. There's absolutely nothing wrong. Now, the thicker the grind, I think the better of the final texture of the chorizo. All right, now we're going to go ahead and create the paste for the chorizo. It's going to flavor the ground meat. We are going to want to put all of our spices in. The recipe calls for folding in the oregano and thyme, but since it's dry, I like to get it in the blender so that it's nice and mixed up so that we don't have dry bits of chorizo in there. Again, you probably don't want to get this stuff on your hands. It will cover your hands in capsaicin, and even if you like stuff spicy, it's not fun to get on your hands. Also, even if you haven't been particularly touching this stuff that much, even if you didn't rip it apart with, bare hands, if you cooked it with bare hands like I did, you want to make sure you wash your hands well and more than one time before you touch anything else on your body. So we don't want to do all of these chilies at a time before we give it a little bit of a blend, otherwise it'll get too Now we have this beautiful spice mix. So in this case, this is the point where if you are using ground meat, you are going to want to get a really large bowl, put some gloves on, put the spice mix in with the pre-ground meat, and mix it really well with your hands. You can use other mixing utensils, but your hands are gonna work the best here. Just make sure you get all the little bits and pieces of the ground meat, and so that it works in. But since we're grinding our own meat, we're going to actually grind directly into this stuff. If you are looking for a grinder on the cheap, this one has done me for about 6 years. It sounds funny, but this Mega Force, I don't know the name of the company, but these are amazing grinders for the price. I think this one was less than $200, I'm pretty sure. And it came with a lot of different attachments, extra blades, all of that. And if you're getting a grinder, I also highly recommend picking up one of these. It's a foot pedal from Cabela's. It's I think 50 bucks. And by plugging this in, you can control the grind with your foot. So that allows you to leave your hands open to actually put the meat in and manage that part. Okay, all my parts are frozen, and I'm starting to put my grinder together. Grinder, you go ahead, put the grinder pieces together, put the little spiral thing in here, and we're going to put the blade, which is this little guy, with the flat side outward, and that pushes up against the grinding plate. I like to use a medium grind on this. Should easily be able to handle this meat. If I was doing, say, cased sausages instead of a loose sausage, I'd probably do a very coarse grain grind first, and then go to a fine grain, depending on the sausage. But in this case, we're just going to go straight to a medium grain. And I have moved all the chorizo spice paste into these serving dishes, and we are going to grind directly into there and mix them all up. I split it into two, one for each 4-pound batch, and it should give me enough space to work on it. Okay, this is the meat that's been sitting in salt. We are handling raw meat, so we do probably want to wear gloves, especially if you have any cuts in your hands. And you don't want to let this run dry. You want to make sure that you have refrigerated meat and run it. If you have a KitchenAid, you can get the meat grinder KitchenAid attachment, but honestly, it's not much cheaper than this. So if you don't have the space, it'll work. But honestly, this it goes a lot faster and it stays a lot cooler than the KitchenAid grinder. And as soon as it gets hot, as soon as your grinder gets hot, it really can make a mess. It can actually cook the meat as it's grinding. So. At this point, there's a couple ways to get the rest of the meat out. You can jam a piece of cling wrap into this, and which you probably already had on top of this. I threw mine away. I'm not going to bother with getting more to it, and that'll push all of this out before you open this actually all up. Let's unplug it. But other than that, I mean, I just tossed a little bit of waste here. You do not want to let this stuff sit. It will make it very difficult to clean out later. And now we're just gonna fold this together, making sure to get good coverage. My chorizo paste is still pretty warm. So, depending on how warm yours are and how refrigerated your ground pork is, you may want to let it cool down a little bit before you grind the pork into it, because you don't want to let the pork get too hot. But mine's cooling down fast enough with this. Now, my gloves are a little on the loose side and seem to want to get sucked off when I'm doing this stuff. You can also get when you get really into it, you can get an actual machine that does this mixing for you to get really good coverage. Getting all that raw meat covered is going to make a big difference when you go to cook this stuff. And I like to vacuum seal mine into vacuum seal bags and use it later on. I freeze most of it, put it in 2-pound packages and freeze most of it. And then use it for anything from tacos to I make a jalapeno chorizo potato popper out of these. Chorizo and eggs. The other day we did chorizo and hominy and eggs. Now you do want to get coverage, but you don't want to work it too much because it will kind of end up the wrong texture if you do too much work on it. So one of the big benefits of making your own chorizo is you can adapt your recipe how you like it. If you like sweeter chorizo, you can add sugar or find a sweeter chorizo recipe. I don't. I like extremely savory chorizo, and that's what this is. The other plus is when you've got loose chorizo, I mean, it's difficult to find at the store, just buying loose chorizo instead of packaged case chorizo. And the case chorizo, you always have to cut it open if you want to use it. But I just like it loose. Same thing is I make breakfast sausage sometime. Well, there are some breakfast sausages out there I enjoy quite a bit. This allows me to customize it. I like to put a whole lot of sage in my breakfast sausage. So when I'm making breakfast sausage, I'll put it in the same thing. I'll make a whole bunch out of a pork shoulder and freeze it and keep it for later, making it exactly the way I like it. And if you like this a little spicier, this actually doesn't turn out too spicy when I make it this way. If you like it a little spicier, especially on the chipotles, just don't do as good of a job removing the seeds, and it'll end up a lot spicier. Okay. I want to show off some of my favorite books about jerky, sausage making, charcuterie in general. My very favorite is In the Charcuterie. I love this because it has beautiful pictures. I really like the recipes. And it really gives you it's got some very unique ideas, and it's got some great flavors to it. Then Charcuterie by Michael Ruhlman and Brian Polson. This one is the first book I started with. It's kind of the pretty much beginner's guide out there. It runs on the salty side. I started by making bacon out of that book, and it is a great book. But I was ready to move on when I was done with it. Home production of quality meats and sausages. I don't currently use this book a lot just because I don't have as much time to really spend on it, but this is known kind of as the Bible of making charcuterie. It's got the best recipes as far as cure ratios and exact numbers. Jerky this is the book. It's by the same people that made In the Charcuterie. It's from the Fatted Calf in San Francisco. Definitely my favorite jerky recipes are in there. The biltong recipe today is not the one that's in there. That one's bad. Do not use that. I mean, it doesn't taste, it's just very boring. It's not authentic biltong. And, but
The pocket pastrami, which is shown on the cover, is amazing. I just couldn't get any brisket for this video, so I am not making the pocket pastrami, which has to be made with brisket pretty much. And then where's the Lucky Peach? That is a collection of sausages from the Lucky Peach magazines, which is kind of, this book is by Chris Yang, and it also is a collaboration with David Chang of Momofuku. In the charcuterie and Where's the Lucky Peach are available on Overdrive from Spartanburg County Public Library.